Happening this week in the grain markets, the U.S. Department of Agriculture on Wednesday released its March crop production and World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate, or WASDE, reports. We were joined by Jeff Peterson of Heartland Farm Partners shortly after those reports were released to get some of his thoughts and his perspectives. I have papers spread on the desk, which means it was report day today. You've been studying the numbers, breaking them down. We'll get to the specifics in a moment, but tell me about the two reports today. What's the most important information you're following?
Yeah, I think as we dig into it, the two big areas that we were looking at, we wanted to see what happened to demand on the corn and soybean side. We also wanted to see what happened basically in South American production. In particular, we figured it'd probably just be adjustments in the Argentine production.
So what were some of the numbers that came out?
Yeah, as we dig into those, I guess we'll start first on the U.S. corn. We ended up seeing them reduce the amount of exports, and that went right to the bottom line. So they increased export or decreased exports 75 million bushels. That increased our ending stock 75 million, and that's really kind of been a pattern that's been going on. We've seen some months before, we've seen some reduction on the export side. It's just that South America had too big of a crop. Now, on the positive side of that, though, we are getting into a point in here where I do think our values are cheaper than what they are out of Brazil, and we're at a point where we'll actually start seeing some of our exports increase. But there is a chance, as far down, as slow a start as we've had, Bryce, there is a chance we might need to adjust it just a little bit lower down the road. Then as we move over to soybeans, kind of just the opposite there. We ended up seeing them reduce the crush 10 million bushels. And honestly, it's really strange for me. With everything that's going on with renewable diesel, I really thought, in the strong demand we've had out there for the soybean oil and also for the soybean meal, I thought these crush plants would be running harder. But needless to say, they did reduce crush, and that's supported because our crush numbers, as we look at them on a month-to-month basis, they're not hitting the targets where they need to. But the positive side is we came over on the export side, and we did see a 25 million bushel increase on the export sides on soybeans. So as a result of that, that's where we ended up seeing that 15 million bushel reduction on the ending stock number for soybeans. And then you move over to Argentina, and ultimately we ended up having an 8 million metric ton adjustment ended up happening there on soybeans. And just to round that off, what that is, that's about 320 million bushels. And over on the corn side, to have a 7 million metric ton reduction on their corn, that's about 280 million bushels. Argentina just hasn't been able to catch a break. If you roll back time, they were having hot, dry conditions, and then it looked like weather improved on them. And then all of a sudden it flipped back the other way, and then we ended up having, of anything, we had a frost. So earlier in that week, you ended up having basically 100-degree temperatures, then you come in and you have a frost, and then we turn back hot and dry again. And so we haven't had a chance to hear much on yields yet. I know there is a little bit of corn harvest going on in Argentina, and actually the numbers that are coming in are a little bit less than what they were expecting. We're not quite there on the bean side yet, though.
As we look at these numbers, of course, the traders give their guesses beforehand, and they try to factor all this in. As this broadcast comes out Friday and Saturday of this week, the trade will be long past here. Where do you think we're going, though, with these numbers, Jeff? What do these numbers tell you about where we're at today?
Yeah, so let's just kind of step back. And I was a little bit surprised. I guess I thought from the report side we'd have found early on, we found a little support in the corn, but then corn kind of sold off. I sure think we're finding a short-term bottom in this corn market. I don't think we've found a long-term bottom. And from here, I think we can have a chance to bounce this bean market a little bit higher. Now, there's a lot of other factors out there that can adjust it, but that's kind of what it feels like right now, Bryce.
You talked about some of these South American numbers. Share with me more about what you're seeing down there in terms of their production, where they're at. Pretty dry in some places, I understand.
Yeah, it is real dry, and let's just kind of walk through kind of where they're at. So let's start in Brazil first. So if you think about Brazil, that harvest got off to a really slow start. And because of basically some of the rainy conditions that they had, but the other side of that was because they really actually had some really good weather conditions, and this crop didn't prematurely end up maturing. It got a chance to mature on its own naturally. And as a result of that, Brazil is going to have some really good crops, and that's why in this report and in past reports we have not seen them adjust the soybean number at all. Now, I think there could be some adjustments on that soybean number. If you look at it right now, they're probably approaching 65-70% harvested on the soybean side. There's parts of actually Mato Grosso, which would be their main producing state within Brazil, that's actually pretty well wrapping up. But I think the key to how the final yield comes in is really going to depend on Rio Grande do Sul. And that's in a very southern part of Brazil. It actually kind of feels like down there they've had some of those same conditions that they've had in Brazil, or actually in Argentina, where they've actually just been a little bit too dry. So it feels like maybe that bean yield will come down a little bit. As we dig into a little bit deeper into their corn, that first corn crop, now keep in mind this first corn crop that they have in Brazil, that only represents about 27% or 23% basically of their overall production. And that's in the southern part of Brazil. And actually those yields are probably going to be pulled off maybe just a little bit yet. But the big thing that we got to really talk about is that safrinha corn crop. That safrinha corn crop is getting planted. They're probably about 70% planted right now in that safrinha corn crop, but they've still got a ways to go yet. And the big thing that we're watching there is that it's actually kind of outside their window of optimum time in which they are getting that crop planted. Now, why is that a big deal? Doesn't South America get rain all the time? Well, surprisingly, Bryce, what happens down there, think about it, in January, they're getting about 10 to 12 inches of moisture per month. But by the time we get out there to July, honestly, they're only getting about a half, maybe a quarter of an inch. So the key there is that they have to get that crop in soon enough so that all of a sudden when we hit pollination and kernel fill, we physically aren't in that real dry time frame. And I think there's some risk of that. And so I think down the road, we might actually see that overall corn yield come down a little bit.
You've set up the factors influencing the market trade pretty well here, Jeff. I want to make sure we include several of our viewer questions we received this week. Kicking off here with Mike. He wanted to know your thoughts now that we've lost some of the premium in both the corn and wheat markets over the last few weeks. He asked, will there be changes in planted acres here in the U.S. with beans holding on to their strength a little bit better? Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's just kind of break it apart. So the big key is going to be is that what's going to happen, as we move on up into the Dakotas. We'll start up there first. What happens on spring wheat acres up there? And could there, if we're a little bit too wet up there, could we end up pulling back some of those spring wheat acres because of prevent plant up there? I think there's a little bit of a chance of that. But a lot of the attention has to come back to the hard red winter wheat areas. And many of the hard red winter wheat areas, as you move yourself into western parts of Kansas, I think we'll see some abandonment there. But when I think we see that abandonment there, I think some of those acres end up spilling over to actually into grain sorghum if they think they have a chance of converting that to another crop if there's enough moisture. Our overall feel, though, is that as we think about the acres, though, is that we think corn acres, if the weather is right, we think we could see a little bit of an increase yet in corn acres yet. Overall, though, we think soybeans will pretty much stay about as everybody's thinking, probably come in somewhere around the 87.5 to 88 million acre range.
Let me see if I can summarize what you said so far. You talk about corn, think we might have found a level here we can stay at for a little bit. Beans might go a little bit higher. How about wheat? Clint wrote in and asked about the wheat market, if you think there might be some better prices on the horizon.
Well, we're really surprised on how much weakness we've seen in this wheat market. We're down into an area on the Kansas City wheat that we believe is finding some support, and we think there is a bounce up higher in here. Part of that reason also has to go over to Ukraine and the discussion about what is their wheat crop going to turn out. We know that their initial acres are probably down about 36%. So overall, I would say that there should be some smaller areas out of there. But the thing we have to remember about wheat, though, Bryce, is that it's grown everywhere and it's used everywhere.
Yep. We wrap up with this question. Long lines of the elevator right now, people moving some old crop. Are you continuing to move old crop right now or hanging on for some better prices?
So we've got a lot of old crop moved. What we're looking to do in here, though, is that on any little bounce here, we're going to advance old crop. We're also going to be physically working on getting more new crop sold.
Reward the market. Jeff, appreciate your time.
You bet. Thanks a lot.